My name is Ashley Coleman Taylor. My pronouns are she and her. I'm an assistant professor of religious studies and women's and gender studies, and I've been at UT for a year now.
My name is Chad Seals. My pronouns are he and him. I'm an associate professor of religious studies, and I've been at UT for 8 years.
Well, I find that I have a pretty unique perspective as a Black queer woman, being a professor, being underrepresented.
I think it's such an important topic for reshaping these departments that have been built around these legacies and which have white men have been the default in terms of hiring. Our field in general, which might not just be unusual, has been challenged by these issues with hiring for a long time. And our department was built in such a way that we weren't conscious as a department going into the hiring from the very beginning of being focused on goals of diversity and inclusion. And so it just happened to fall out that almost everyone in the department was white and male through the hiring process. And what's unusual about our department is that we're not very old. So we're a new department that really had a chance and opportunity to create a department that was not following the sort of standard forms of hiring that have plagued the field in our discipline. And we didn't, as a department, take that opportunity. So now I think we've become more, as a department, aware of that history and are looking, moving forward, to make a very conscious effort to include goals of diversity and inclusion in every hire that we have.
So I find that in a lot of departments, when you look at kind of the profile of professors, there's usually kind of one representation from each underrepresented group, right? So you have a Black person, so you have a Black man. You need a woman, so you have a white woman, right? And that oftentimes it just kind of has this kind of one-stop approach to diversity, kind of the fill in the blanks or kind of fill in the pool with the underrepresented minority framework, instead of actually thinking inclusively and thinking about the types of scholars that can help to draw in not only graduate students, help to draw in funding. Those of us who sit at these intersections of multiple levels of oppression are often missing from the picture.
Rather than seeing it as an opportunity, rather than seeing it as innovative, cutting edge of doing work that's going to really transform the field and attract graduate students, make them more competitive on the job market, it's seen as a burden. It's reframed as, oh, we're doing our duty towards diversity and inclusion. It's our obligation. So it's seen as it's still in this sort of white missionary mentality of, oh, this is my obligation to help someone in need. So it frames the hiring as one of need, when rather it's one of opportunity.
I would think about the mechanisms in which white supremacy reproduces itself. And it's typically centering whiteness, right? And kind of centering those who have kind of historically had the privilege and the power. Who is in the canon, right? Who, if we were to have a class on, classics, a classic text in a field, who is mentioned in that canon and why, right? So to whom do we give this epistemic privilege? To whom do we kind of bestow this title of expert? And that's something that also has to be really reconsidered if we're trying to shift discourses and shift fields and thus shift departments. So oftentimes it's expected that those of us who kind of might represent a diverse pool of applicants, it's expected that we are doing research on topics with which we have firsthand experience, right? So it's like, of course, Black scholars do research in Black communities, or trans scholars do research on transness, right? But what we're failing to examine is the ways that all of us are attracted to our research for a very particular and oftentimes personal reason, right? So while that's only attributed to this kind of diverse pool of candidates, all scholars are attracted to a particular area of research because it moves them in some way, or they have a particular interest, or they, might have personal experience with this research area. So I want to say that in a way, kind of research topics even get flattened, and kind of people expect that certain groups are going to do research on that group because they are of that group. Right. And yes, it's true. And it happens often. And most of us do.
I think it's such an important point about how the diversity is representation in a singular way without understanding diversity more broadly. Like, so for example, the diversity of whiteness in the field is because it's everywhere. So no one questions in our field of religious studies why 5 white guys are talking about Jesus within a span of 40 years. So that you can have 5 white guys reading Greek in multiple languages to talk about one person in one place. And no one questions whether that's a reproduction of itself. Do you only need one person who does that? Why do you need 5 people who do that? However, if you hire a scholar of color who's studying a specific geographic area, then the issue becomes, why do we need another scholar of color who may be in a similar geographic area, but doing different things or a range of different things? Like understanding that diversity is not just like you've covered it. I mean, Ashley just said this, but you've covered it with that one hire. And also that there's this assumption too at least within our department and a lot of these conversations, is that if you need to hire, our department's been mostly men since its beginning. So we need more women in the department as an argument. However, the assumption is that a woman can speak on all issues of gender and sexuality. And that even if there's a scholar in the room who's an authority on those issues, Dr. Coleman Taylor, and that then it's difficult, I think, for some faculty to hear that there's contested conversations and there's different arguments about gender and sexuality. And just because there's a woman who is a candidate doesn't mean she's an expert on all approaches to the study of gender and sexuality. Diversity is much more layered than just checking a box and now we're done.